Marcus Hayes locked his calloused hands together over her sternum, pressing down hard. 30 compressions, 2 inches deep. The rhythm drilled into muscle memory from a free CPR class 4 years ago at the
Miss, are
Jefferson
you
Park
alright?
Community
I feel
Center.
so
Back when
dizzy.
Sophie
Let
was
me
3,
help you up.
and he'd been
Thank
terrified
you.
she might choke on something while he was at work. The woman's designer suit wrinkled beneath his weight navy fabric, expensive enough to cost more than his monthly rent. Her skin had gone cold, lips turning blue under the fluorescent lights of the elevator lobby on the 40th floor of Riverside Tower. Marcus tilted her chin back, pinched her nose, and pressed his mouth against hers. 1 breath, 2 breaths. Back to compressions. His shoulders screamed with exhaustion, sweat dripping onto her motionless face, but stopping meant watching her die, and he'd already seen enough death in his 40 years to know he couldn't carry one more. The elevator doors kept bouncing against her outstretched arm, a mechanical hiccup that would have been funny if a woman wasn't dying on the marble floor. The phone in the elevator hung useless, a maintenance tag dangling from the receiver. His own cell sat in his cleaning cart 20 feet down the hall, and by the time he ran to get it, she'd be gone. After the 3rd round of compressions, her body jerked. A gasp tore from her throat, wet and desperate, and the most beautiful sound Marcus had heard since Sophie's first cry in the delivery room 7 years ago. The woman's eyes fluttered open, unfocused, then sharpening on his face with an intensity that made him suddenly aware of how close they were. Her gaze dropped to his name tag, lingering on the words stamped in cheap plastic: Marcus, custodial staff. Something flickered across her features that wasn't gratitude, embarrassment maybe, or surprise that someone like him had been the one to save her. The expression lasted only a heartbeat before footsteps pounded down the hallway, and paramedics in navy uniforms shouldered him aside with professional efficiency. Marcus stood back, suddenly conscious of how he looked. His gray uniform was damp with sweat, hands trembling from adrenaline and exhaustion, just another custodian in someone else's emergency. The woman didn't look at him again as they lifted her onto the stretcher, already retreating into whatever world people like her inhabited. A world of corner offices and decisions that moved Marcus a stratosphere Marcus couldn't reach, even if he wanted to. He picked up her scattered papers with careful hands, years of cleaning other people's messes, making him methodical even now. One document caught his eye, thick cardstock with embossed letters: Elena Thornton, Chief Executive Officer, Thornton Industries. He'd cleaned her office before always after she'd left for the day. The space immaculate except for coffee rings on her desk and the faint scent of expensive perfume. She was just another name on a door to him, existing in a dimension that rarely overlapped with his own. The rest of his shift passed in a blur of automatic motions. Mop the floors, empty the trash, wipe down the break room counters. But his mind kept returning to that moment when her eyes had found his name tag, the complex emotion he couldn't quite decode. The strange intimacy of breathing life into a stranger. By the time his shift ended at 7 in the morning, pale sunlight was filtering through the tower's glass facade, and Marcus was bone-tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. He picked Sophie up from his sister Rachel's apartment in Uptown, a 3rd-floor walk-up, where the radiator clanked all winter, and the neighbors upstairs fought loud enough to rattle the ceiling. Sophie was already awake, curled on Rachel's couch with a library book about jellyfish, her dark hair tangled from sleep. She looked up when Marcus walked in, and her face transformed with a smile that made every sleepless night worth it. 7 years old, and she still thought her father could fix anything, a belief Marcus worked hard to maintain, even when the world kept proving otherwise. Rachel handed him a thermos of coffee without comment. His younger sister had that particular talent for knowing when he needed silence instead of questions. She was 35, worked night shifts as a nurse at Northwestern Memorial, and had been Sophie's secondary parent since Jennifer walked out when the baby was 6 months old. Marcus still remembered Jennifer's exact words: "I can't do this. I need to find myself. I'm sorry." As if those syllables could somehow make abandoning your infant daughter into something noble. He'd stopped being angry about it years ago, mostly because anger required energy he needed for other things, like making sure Sophie never doubted she was wanted. Their apartment was in Logan Square, a 1-bedroom where Sophie slept in the actual bedroom, and Marcus took the pull-out couch in the living room. The walls were thin enough to hear their neighbor's television through the drywall, and the water pressure was terrible, but the rent was something he could almost afford on $42,000 a year. Sophie dumped her backpack by the door and immediately started telling him about the different types of jellyfish, her hands moving as she described bioluminescence and cnidocytes and ocean currents. Marcus listened while he made her breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, the comfortable rhythm of their morning routine. He watched her eat, noting the duct tape holding her backpack's zipper together, the sneakers that were getting too small. Next month he'd need to buy her new shoes, and the month after that, there'd be something else. Sophie never complained, but she'd started noticing that other kids had things she didn't. New clothes instead of thrift store finds. Field trips he couldn't always afford. The small accumulating evidence that some people mattered more than others, a lesson Marcus had hoped to delay as long as possible. After he dropped Sophie at school, Marcus went home and tried to sleep. His brain wouldn't cooperate, replaying the elevator scene on loop. The weight of Elena Thornton's sternum under his palms. The moment her eyes had opened and found him kneeling over her, his mouth still wet from breathing into hers. The way she'd looked at his name tag just a fraction too long. He gave up on sleep around noon and spent the afternoon fixing the leaky faucet in the bathroom with parts he'd picked up from the hardware store, the kind of practical problem-solving that usually cleared his head. It didn't work this time. 3 days later, Mr. Patterson found Marcus in the break room on the 35th floor halfway through his shift. Patterson was 58, had been supervising the night custodial crew for 20 years, and treated his workers with a respect that was rare in the industry. He handed Marcus a cream-colored envelope with handwriting too elegant to be anything but expensive. The note inside was brief, written in fountain pen on cardstock that probably cost more than Marcus made in a day. Mr. Hayes, I would like to thank you personally. Please meet me at my office tomorrow at 3 p.m. Executive Elevator Code 8451. Elena Thornton. Marcus stared at the numbers, already feeling the weight of obligation settling on his shoulders. He didn't want to be thanked. Didn't want the awkward moment where she'd try to give him money and he'd have to refuse without making it seem like some kind of statement. But ignoring the invitation felt wrong too. So the next afternoon he found himself standing in front of the executive elevator, punching in the code and riding up to a world he usually only saw when it was empty. Elena Thornton's office took up half the 40th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a view of Chicago that stretched to the lake. Sunlight poured through the glass, turning the city into something bright and sharp. The woman from the elevator stood silhouetted against that brightness, and when she turned, Marcus saw the controlled power in every line of her body. Charcoal suit tailored to perfection, heels that added 3 inches to her height, dark hair pulled back in a way that was both severe and elegant. But her eyes carried something else, a hairline fracture in the facade. Exhaustion, maybe, or loneliness. She extended her hand and Marcus shook it, noting the firm grip and the subtle tremor she couldn't quite hide. Her palm was cool against his calloused fingers. Up close he could see the fine lines around her eyes, the kind that came from squinting at spreadsheets and profit margins until the numbers blurred together. Thank you for coming. Her voice was lower than he remembered, controlled, but not cold. I wanted to express my gratitude in person. Marcus nodded, already uncomfortable in the expensive space. His work uniform felt shabby against the backdrop of leather furniture and abstract art that probably cost more than his car. Elena picked up an envelope from her desk, thick with what could only be cash or a check with too many zeros. You saved my life. This is inadequate, I know, but I'd like you to have it. The words came out before he could second-guess them. I don't want your money. Elena's perfectly composed expression cracked with genuine surprise. Her hand holding the envelope dropped slightly as if she'd forgotten how to complete the gesture. I'm sorry. I did what anyone with basic human decency would do. You don't owe me anything. Silence stretched between them, charged with something Marcus couldn't name. Elena set the envelope back on her desk with deliberate care, like she was handling evidence of her own misjudgment. Then what do you want? Marcus thought about Sophie asking why some kids got new backpacks while hers was held together with duct tape. About the way his daughter had started to understand that the world measured worth in dollars and cents and her father came up short by that metric. He looked at Elena Thornton, this woman who'd built an empire and nearly died for it, and told her the truth. "I just want to know you're okay." The simplicity seemed to unsettle her more than anything else he could have said. Elena moved to the window, her posture shifting into something less guarded. For the first time since he'd walked into her office, she looked vulnerable instead of powerful. "The doctors said it was a cardiac episode, stress-induced." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "They want me to slow down, make lifestyle changes. I built this company from nothing. I don't know how to slow down. I don't know how to be anything other than this." Marcus understood better than she probably realized. He'd spent 7 years being nothing but Sophie's father, defining himself by that single role until everything else had worn away. "Maybe that's the problem. You forgot what you were doing this for in the first place." Elena turned to look at him, really look at him, and Marcus felt the weight of that attention. She wasn't seeing his uniform anymore, wasn't dismissing him as just the janitor who happened to know CPR. She was trying to figure out who he actually was beneath the label, and the intensity of her focus made something shift in his chest. "You're not what I expected." The words came out soft, almost to herself. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "Neither are you." 3 weeks crawled by before Marcus saw Elena Thornton again. 3 weeks of his normal routine work from 11 at night until 7 in the morning, sleep in fractured increments, pick Sophie up from Rachel's, make breakfast, drop her at school, try to be the kind of father who had enough left over for homework, help, and bedtime stories. The elevator where he'd found Elena dying got fixed. The maintenance tag removed the mechanical hiccup, smoothed away, until it was just another corporate elevator carrying important people to important meetings. Then one night, Marcus looked up from mopping the 42nd floor hallway and saw her. Elena stood in the doorway of a conference room, backlit by the city lights visible through the windows. She wasn't wearing a suit this time, just slacks and a blouse that looked rumpled like she'd been wearing it for 12 hours. Her hair was down, and without the severe styling, she looked younger and more tired. "Couldn't sleep?" The question came out before Marcus could think better of it. Elena leaned against the doorframe, and something in her posture suggested she'd been holding herself upright through pure will. Sleep would require going home. Going home would require admitting I accomplished nothing meaningful in 16 hours of work. Marcus continued mopping the rhythmic swish of water against tile, filling the silence. He'd learned long ago that people said more when you gave them space instead of pressing. Elena watched him work for a moment, then spoke again. "What made you start this job? The night shift, I mean. Pays 50 cents more an hour than day shift, and I don't have to deal with executives treating me like furniture." He glanced up, meeting her eyes. "No offense." "None taken. I suspect I've been guilty of that more times than I'd like to admit." She moved into the hallway closer to where he worked. "You have a daughter." It wasn't a question, but Marcus answered anyway. "Sophie, she's 7. Wants to be a marine biologist this week. Last month it was astronaut." "What happened to her mother?" The directness should have bothered him, but there was genuine curiosity in Elena's voice, not prying. "Left when Sophie was 6 months old, said she needed to find herself. Meanwhile, I'm trying to explain to a 7-year-old why her mother chose freedom over her." Elena was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice had gone soft. "That's not Sophie's fault. I know that, you know that, but try explaining it to a kid who sees other mothers at school pickup and wonders what she did wrong." Marcus wrung out the mop water, streaming back into the bucket. "Sorry, you didn't come up here to hear about my problems." "I didn't come up here with any particular plan." Elena wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture that made her look less like a CEO and more like someone who'd lost her way. "I just couldn't stand being in my penthouse for another minute. It's beautiful and empty, and I hate being there." Marcus recognized the loneliness in that admission, the echo of his own nights after Sophie went to sleep, and the apartment felt too quiet. He leaned the mop against the wall and met her eyes. "What made you start this company? What was the point before it became about not stopping?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. Elena's careful composure wavered, and for a moment Marcus saw straight through to whatever she'd been running from. My father owned a small factory in Wisconsin, made surgical instruments. When he got sick, bigger companies came in like vultures, bought him out for pennies on the dollar, then closed the factory. 40 families lost their income. My father lost his purpose. He died 3 months later. Her hands had curled into fists at her sides, knuckles white. Marcus waited. I started Thornton Industries to prove you could build something big without destroying everything small, that you could be successful without being ruthless. She laughed bitter and sharp. But I became exactly what I hated. I just did it with better PR and a board of directors who pretend to care about ethics. You're aware of it, Marcus said quietly. That's more than most people in your position. Awareness doesn't change anything. I'm still the person who works 16-hour days and calls it dedication instead of cowardice. Still the person who can't remember the last time I had a conversation that wasn't about quarterly earnings or market share. Elena looked at him, and the vulnerability in her expression made Marcus's chest tighten. That night in the elevator when I saw your name tag, do you know what my first thought was? Marcus shook his head. Not thank God I'm alive. Not gratitude that someone was there. She swallowed hard. It was embarrassment. I was embarrassed that a janitor had seen me vulnerable, that someone like you had touched me, had breathed into my mouth, that the person who saved my life was someone I would have walked past without noticing. The honesty was brutal, and Marcus felt the sting of it even as he appreciated her willingness to name the ugliness. At least you're aware of it. Does that make it better? No, but it's a start. Marcus picked up his mop again, needing something to do with his hands. You don't act like someone who's been told they matter. How do you do that? I have a daughter who thinks I hung the moon. That makes it hard to believe the world when it tells me I'm nobody. He paused, considering his next words carefully. Maybe that's the problem with people like you. You forgot how to see the people who aren't special. Or maybe you just never learned. Elena smiled, and it was real this time, reaching her eyes. I like that you don't handle me with kid gloves. Everyone in my life is either afraid of me or wants something from me. You're the first person in years who's just honest. After that night, Elena started appearing during Marcus's shift with increasing frequency. Not every night, but often enough that Marcus found himself listening for her footsteps in the empty corridors. They talked while he worked conversations that ranged from profound to absurd. Elena asked about Sophie's latest obsession with jellyfish, and Marcus asked about the pressure of running a company where hundreds of families depended on her decisions. Sometimes they just worked in comfortable silence, Elena sorting through papers at a conference room table while Marcus cleaned around her, the quiet companionship enough. 5 weeks after the elevator, Marcus brought Sophie to work with him. Rachel had picked up an extra shift at the hospital, and their usual backup babysitter had canceled, leaving Marcus with no good options. Sophie had fallen asleep with her head pillowed on her arms, a math worksheet half finished beneath her. She looks like her mother, but she acts like me, thank God. You never talk about her, your ex-wife. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, aware of Elena standing close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive. Jennifer left when Sophie was 6 months old, said she couldn't be tied down, needed to find herself. I've spent 7 years trying to figure out how to explain to Sophie that her mother chose freedom over her, that she wasn't enough to make Jennifer stay. Elena's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers warm and sure. The touch lasted only seconds, but Marcus felt its echo long after she pulled away. She'll grow up knowing her father chose her every single day. That's not nothing, Marcus. The use of his first name sent something electric down his spine. They stood there in the quiet, watching Sophie sleep, and Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Something was growing between them, terrifying and inevitable, and he didn't know how to stop it. Wasn't sure he wanted to. The next evening, Marcus arrived at work to find Mr. Patterson waiting with a printed memo. Corporate was implementing new policies, no fraternizing between staff and executives, no personal conversations during work hours, new security cameras in all common areas. The language was clinical and final. Marcus didn't need to ask who had prompted the changes. Someone had noticed Elena's late nights, the growing connection between a CEO and a custodian, and decided it needed to stop before it became a problem. That night, Elena didn't appear. Marcus cleaned the 40th floor with mechanical efficiency, hyper-aware of the new cameras mounted in the corners, their lenses watching his every move. He told himself it was for the best, that whatever had been building between them was impossible anyway, doomed by the reality of their different worlds. But the emptiness felt heavier than usual, and when his shift ended, he sat in his car in the parking garage for 20 minutes, unwilling to go home to his too quiet apartment. At 3 in the morning, Elena was waiting by his car. She stood beneath the fluorescent lights in a coat too thin for November in Chicago, arms wrapped around herself against the cold. Marcus's heart kicked against his ribs as he approached, and he saw she was shaking. Whether from cold or emotion, he couldn't tell. "They told you." It wasn't a question. Elena nodded, her breath fogging in the chill air. "My board. They think you're taking advantage of me, or that I'm having some kind of breakdown. They suggested I increase security and limit my after-hours presence in the building." Marcus laughed, the sound bitter in his throat. "Of course that's what they think. Couldn't possibly be that you enjoy talking to me. Couldn't be that I see you as more than a paycheck." "What do you see me as, Marcus?" The question hung between them, loaded with everything they'd been dancing around for weeks. Marcus could lie, could retreat into safety, and preserve the careful distance that would keep them both from getting hurt. Or he could tell her the truth and risk everything he'd worked so hard to build: his job, his stability, his ability to provide for Sophie. The words came out anyway, raw and honest. "I see someone who's forgotten how to be anything except successful. Someone brilliant and driven and so afraid of being ordinary that she's built a fortress around herself. Someone lonely but won't admit it because loneliness suggests weakness. Someone I can't stop thinking about even though I know better." He took a breath, pushed through the fear. "Even though we make no sense. Even though getting involved would complicate my life in ways I can't afford. I have a daughter who depends on me, and I can't risk my job for something that might not work out. But God help me, Elena. I see you, all of you, and I don't know what to do with that." Elena's eyes glistened in the harsh garage lighting, tears threatening but not falling. She closed the distance between them, one hand coming up to rest against his chest, right over his heart. Marcus could feel it hammering beneath her palm. "I see someone who thinks he doesn't deserve good things because he spent so long surviving. Someone kind and present who sees people, really sees them in a way most people never learn. Someone who kissed me back to life and walked away like it was nothing, like he doesn't expect gratitude or recognition or—" She paused, the word catching in her throat. "Or love." Love. The word hung in the cold air between them, unacknowledged but impossible to ignore. Marcus reached up his hand, cupping her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. Her skin was cold beneath his palm. "This is a bad idea." Elena's voice came out barely above a whisper. "I know. We're from different worlds. People will judge. They'll say terrible things. I know. I have a daughter who—" Elena rose on her toes and kissed him, cutting off whatever excuse he'd been about to make. The kiss was nothing like the desperate mouth-to-mouth resuscitation in the elevator. This was want and recognition and the acknowledgement of something that had been building since the moment her eyes had opened and found him kneeling over her. Marcus's arms came around her waist, pulling her closer, and Elena's hands fisted in his jacket like she was afraid he'd disappear if she let go. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Elena's expression was fierce. "I don't care what they think. I'm tired of living according to other people's expectations. I'm tired of being alone in rooms full of people. I'm tired of pretending I don't feel this." Marcus wanted to believe it could be that simple. But he thought about Sophie, about stability, about the job he couldn't afford to lose. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him heavier than desire. "I have a daughter who depends on me. I can't risk my job for something that might not work out." The words felt like betrayal even as he said them. Elena stepped back. her face closing off the CEO mask, sliding back into place. "You're right. This was a mistake. Forgive me." She straightened her coat with sharp, precise movements. "I'll make sure the new policies don't affect your employment." She turned to walk away, heels clicking against concrete, and Marcus stood frozen. Every instinct screamed to call her back, to take the risk, to choose the possibility of love over the certainty of safety. But he stayed silent, rooted by fear and the bone-deep knowledge that some luxuries weren't meant for people like him. Elena's footsteps echoed in the parking garage, growing fainter until finally they disappeared altogether, and Marcus was alone with his practical choices and the taste of her still on his lips. 2 weeks passed like open wounds. Marcus didn't see Elena during his shifts, and the 40th floor felt emptier than it should. He threw himself into work, into being the best father he could be for Sophie, into convincing himself he'd made the right choice. But the apartment felt smaller, the routine felt hollower, and sometimes he'd catch himself listening for footsteps that never came. Sophie noticed something was wrong. She was too perceptive for her own good, could read his moods like weather patterns. One morning over breakfast she asked if he was sad, and Marcus lied and said he was just tired. She nodded like she believed him, but her eyes said otherwise. 7 years old and already learning that sometimes the people you love hurt in ways you can't fix. Then his phone rang during lunch on a Tuesday. The school. Sophie had fallen on the playground, hit her head, was being taken to St. Catherine's Hospital for evaluation. Marcus's world narrowed to a single point of terror. He left his apartment at a run, drove through yellow lights. He should have stopped, for his hands shaking on the steering wheel. Nothing mattered except getting to his daughter, making sure she was okay, being there when she needed him. His phone rang again while he was driving. He almost didn't answer, but some instinct made him fumble it to his ear. Elena's voice came through steady and calm in a way that cut through his panic. "Marcus, I heard about Sophie. I'm at St. Catherine's. The ambulance is bringing her here. I'll stay with her until you arrive. Just drive carefully. She's going to be okay." Marcus's throat closed up. "How did you—" "Drive carefully," Elena repeated, and hung up. He made it to the hospital in 17 minutes, abandoned his car in the emergency lane, and ran through automatic doors into fluorescent chaos. Elena was waiting just inside, and the relief that crashed through Marcus nearly took his knees out. She steadied him with a hand on his arm, and he saw she'd already been crying. "She's okay. Minor concussion, no fractures. The doctors want to keep her for observation, but she's been asking for you." Elena's voice was calm, professional, but her hand on his arm was shaking. "Room 4 down the hall." Marcus wanted to ask how she'd known why she'd come, what she'd been doing there when the ambulance arrived. But Sophie was more important than answers, so he ran down the hallway to room 4 and burst through the door to find his daughter sitting up in a hospital bed, a white bandage wrapped around her forehead. Sophie saw him and burst into tears. Marcus crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid weight of her against his chest. Alive. Safe. His. Over Sophie's head, he met Elena's eyes where she stood in the doorway. The expression on her face was soft with longing and love, and something that looked like grief. Sophie pulled back, wiping her eyes. "The lady stayed with me, Daddy. She held my hand in the ambulance. She told me you were coming and that I was going to be okay." Marcus looked at Elena, this woman who'd made sure his daughter wasn't alone and afraid. "Who is she?" Sophie studied Elena with the frank curiosity of childhood. "Are you the lady from Daddy's work, the one he talks about but pretends he's not talking about?" Elena laughed, the sound genuine and unguarded. "I think I might be." She moved into the room, crouching beside the bed so she was eye level with Sophie. "Your dad talks about you all the time. He told me you want to be a marine biologist, that you know everything about jellyfish." Sophie's eyes lit up and she launched into an explanation of bioluminescence that involved hand gestures and sound effects. Elena listened with the same intensity she probably brought to board meetings, asking questions that made Sophie glow with importance. Marcus watched them together and felt something crack open in his chest, something he'd been keeping locked down for weeks. The doctor confirmed Sophie could go home with instructions for monitoring the concussion. Elena insisted on driving them, and Marcus was too wrung out to argue. They loaded Sophie into Elena's car, a black sedan that cost more than Marcus made in 2 years, and drove through Chicago's afternoon traffic to Logan Square. Elena didn't comment on the neighborhood or the building with its cracked sidewalk and rusted fire escape. She just helped Sophie up the stairs and into the apartment, her presence filling the small space. Elena looked around with open curiosity. At the photos stuck to the refrigerator with magnets. At Sophie's drawings taped to the walls, colorful renderings of jellyfish and coral reefs. At the solar system mobile hanging from the living room ceiling, planets made from painted styrofoam balls. This is a home, a real one. I have a penthouse that cost more than most houses. It's beautiful and empty, and I hate being there. Marcus got Sophie settled in her bedroom with instructions to rest, then returned to find Elena standing in his kitchen looking lost. The contrast between her expensive coat and his second-hand furniture should have been jarring, but somehow it just made her seem more human, more real. "Thank you," Marcus's voice came out rough, "for being there, for staying with her, for making sure she wasn't scared." Elena met his eyes. "I would have done it for anyone." "No, you wouldn't have. You did it because you care. About her. About me." He moved closer, unable to help himself. "Why did you come to the hospital?" "I have someone monitoring the 911 calls in the area, in case you or Sophie—" She trailed off, looking embarrassed. "I know how that sounds. I know it's invasive and probably crossing lines, but I needed to know you were safe even if I couldn't be with you." Marcus's chest tightened. This woman, this brilliant, powerful, impossible woman, had been watching over them from a distance because he'd been too afraid to let her stay. "Elena, don't." She held up a hand. "You were right that night in the parking garage. This is complicated. Your job, your daughter, the impossibility of it all. I understand why you stepped back. But Marcus, I've been thinking these past 2 weeks about playing it safe, about protecting myself from hurt. And I realized something." She took a breath, and Marcus saw her hands trembling. "I've spent my life playing it safe with everything that mattered. I never risked my heart because I was afraid of losing control. Then you came along and saved my life and walked away like you didn't need anything from me, like I wasn't worth the complication. That's not— Let me finish." Elena's voice was steady now, determined. "I don't know how to do this without trying to control everything. I don't know how to be vulnerable without it feeling like weakness. But I want to learn. If you'll let me. If you'll take a chance on something that probably looks impossible from the outside." Marcus thought about Sophie in the next room, about the stability he'd worked so hard to build, about all the practical reasons why this was a terrible idea. Then he thought about Elena's hand in his, in the darkness, about the way she'd stayed with his daughter in an ambulance, about the loneliness in her voice when she talked about her empty penthouse. "I'm terrified," he said quietly. "I've spent 7 years focused on being a good father. I told myself that was enough, that I didn't need anything else. But I'm lonely, Elena. I'm so lonely sometimes it feels like drowning. Then you're there and suddenly I can breathe, and that scares me more than anything." Elena's hand found his fingers lacing together. "What if we're scared together? What if we just see what happens one day at a time?" Marcus looked down at their joined hands, calloused, meeting smooth. "Sophie comes first. Always. If this affects her negatively, if it causes problems at her school or makes her life harder, I'll end it. No hesitation. I would expect nothing less." Elena squeezed his hand. "I want to add to your lives, not complicate them. I want to be there for the good and the bad and everything in between, but only if you'll let me." The night passed in 2-hour increments, Marcus checking on Sophie for signs of concussion. Around 4 in the morning he dozed off on the couch with his head on Elena's shoulder, her hand running through his hair in a gesture so tender it made his throat tight. He woke to find Sophie and Elena at the kitchen table drawing pictures of different jellyfish species, while Sophie explained the difference between box jellyfish and moon jellies, with the gravity of someone sharing classified information. Elena looked up when Marcus emerged from the bedroom, and the smile she gave him was soft and unguarded. "She's teaching me about venomous species." Sophie beamed. "Elena didn't know that jellyfish don't have brains. Can you believe it?" Marcus made coffee and watched them together, his daughter and this woman who'd somehow become essential to his breathing. When it was time for Elena to leave, she paused at the door. "I'm going to change things at work. Better wages for custodial staff, health insurance, paid sick leave. Not because of us, but because you were right. People deserve to be seen. People will say I manipulated you." Elena's eyes flashed with something fierce. "Let them. It's the right thing to do. I just needed someone to remind me what right looks like." She kissed him soft and sweet, a promise of more to come. "I'll see you soon." Marcus closed the door behind her and turned to find Sophie watching him with knowing eyes. She didn't say anything, just smiled and went back to her jellyfish drawings, and Marcus thought maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. Over the following months, Marcus and Elena navigated their relationship with the caution of people who'd both learned that good things could shatter if handled too roughly. They kept it quiet at first, a fragile thing that needed protection from the scrutiny of board members and co-workers who wouldn't understand. Elena stopped appearing during Marcus's shifts, but she started showing up at his apartment after work, arriving in tailored suits that looked out of place against his second-hand furniture. She'd change into jeans and one of his old sweaters, transforming from CEO to something softer, and help Sophie with homework while Marcus cooked dinner. Sophie adapted with the resilience of childhood, claiming Elena as family with the same matter-of-fact confidence she applied to jellyfish taxonomy. She'd grab Elena's hand when they walked to the park, demanded Elena's opinion on science fair projects, and once asked if Elena could be her mother for the school's family tree assignment. Marcus had frozen at that question, waiting for Elena to panic, but she just knelt beside Sophie and explained gently that she couldn't replace Sophie's mother, but she'd be honored to be something new. Something that didn't have a name yet, but was theirs to define. The reforms at Thornton Industries rolled out in waves. Better wages for custodial staff, comprehensive health insurance, paid sick leave, child care subsidies. Some board members objected, called it fiscally irresponsible, warned that shareholders would revolt. Elena replaced 3 of them in a single meeting, her voice cold as she explained that a company built on the backs of undervalued workers wasn't worth preserving. Marcus heard about it secondhand from Mr. Patterson, who'd been in the building long enough to know when power was shifting. Patterson cornered Marcus one night and asked point-blank if something was going on between him and the CEO. Marcus had hesitated, then nodded, waiting for judgment. Patterson had just clapped him on the shoulder and told him not to screw it up. They fought about money first. Elena wanted to help with Sophie's school expenses, buy her new clothes, cover the cost of the field trip to the shed aquarium that Marcus couldn't afford. Marcus refused with the same stubborn pride that had carried him through 7 years of single parenthood. The argument happened in his apartment after Sophie had gone to bed, voices kept low but tension crackling between them. "It's not charity, Marcus. I want to do this. And I want to provide for my daughter without feeling like I'm failing because I can't give her everything you could." His hands clenched at his sides. "I know you mean well, but every time you try to solve my problems with money, it feels like you're saying I'm not enough." Elena's face had crumpled. "That's not what I mean at all. I just want to help. I have resources and you're working yourself into the ground." "Because that's what fathers do. We work. We provide. We figure it out." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, frustration bleeding into exhaustion. "I know it doesn't make sense to you. You've probably never had to worry about money a day in your life, but letting you pay for things makes me feel small." The words hung between them, ugly and true. Elena was quiet for a long moment, then moved to the window overlooking the street. "You're right. I haven't worried about money since my 20s, but I've worried about plenty of other things, like whether anyone would ever see past my bank account to the person underneath." whether I'd spend my whole life alone because being with me meant dealing with the scrutiny and the pressure and the constant judgment. She turned to face him. I'm not trying to make you feel small, Marcus. I'm trying to be part of your life in a meaningful way. But if my money makes that impossible, then we have a bigger problem than I thought. They'd gone to bed angry that night, Marcus on the pull-out couch, and Elena in Sophie's room after Sophie insisted on sleeping with her dad. The next morning, Elena had been gone a note on the kitchen counter saying she needed to think. Marcus had spent the day convinced he'd ruined everything, his pride driving away the first person in years who'd made him feel less alone. But Elena came back that evening with a proposal. She'd contribute to a savings account for Sophie's future college emergencies, whatever came up. Marcus would manage it, make all the decisions about when and how to use it. She wouldn't interfere unless he asked. It wasn't perfect, but it was compromise, and Marcus had agreed because the alternative was losing her. 6 months after the night in the parking garage, Marcus received notification of a promotion. Night supervisor, better pay, actual benefits, the kind of stability that felt like winning the lottery. He accepted immediately, then spent the next 3 hours spiraling into suspicion. Had Elena arranged this? Used her influence to get him promoted as some kind of backdoor charity? The doubt ate at him until he couldn't stand it anymore. He confronted her at her brownstone, the 3-bedroom house in Lincoln Park she'd bought 2 months ago, close enough to his neighborhood to feel intentional, far enough to maintain some separation. She answered the door in yoga pants and a t-shirt, hair wet from the shower, and Marcus pushed past her into the living room before she could invite him in. "Did you do this? Did you tell them to promote me?" Elena's face shifted from surprise to hurt. "What are you talking about?" "The supervisor position. I got it today, and all I can think about is whether I earned it or whether you pulled strings behind my back." His voice was rising, weeks of insecurity spilling over. "Did you go to Patterson? Did you threaten the company because I need to know if I'm actually good at my job or if I'm just your charity case? You think I would undermine you like that?" Elena's voice went sharp, the CEO tone she used when someone questioned her judgment. "You think so little of me that you'd assume I'd sabotage your career to make myself feel better? I think you're used to solving problems with money and influence. I think you don't understand how it feels to wonder if anything you achieve is actually yours." Marcus was breathing hard, anger and fear tangled together. "People know about us now. They see you with me. How do I know this isn't pity dressed up as merit?" Elena stepped closer, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "After everything, you still think I pity you. I love you. You stubborn, prideful man. I love your integrity and your daughter and the life you've built from nothing. But if you can't accept that good things can happen to you without strings attached, then we have a much bigger problem than a job promotion." "Maybe we do." The words came out before Marcus could stop them, and he watched Elena flinch like he'd struck her. "Maybe this whole thing was a mistake from the start. We're too different. Our lives don't fit together, and I'm tired of trying to force them." Elena's face went blank, the protective mask sliding into place. "Get out." "Elena." "I said get out." Her voice was cold, controlled, everything she'd been when he first met her. "You want to believe the worst about me, that I'm manipulating you for some twisted reason? Fine, believe it. But I won't stand here and defend myself against accusations that say more about your insecurity than my character." Marcus left, slamming the door behind him, and drove home with his hands shaking on the wheel. He'd done it again. Let his fear destroy something good before it could destroy him first. The pattern was so familiar, it felt like muscle memory: push away, retreat to safety, convince himself he was better off alone. The next morning he went to find Patterson. His old supervisor was in the break room pouring coffee into a thermos and looked unsurprised to see Marcus. "Let me guess. You're here to ask about the promotion. Did Elena have anything to do with it?" Patterson took a long sip of coffee, considering. "Son, that promotion's been in the works for 8 months. You're the best worker we have, punctual, thorough, good with the younger guys. I recommended you to corporate back in March, long before I knew you and Miss Thornton were involved. Hell, I didn't find out about you two until last month when I saw you leaving her office during the day shift. The relief that flooded through Marcus was immediately followed by shame. I accused her of manipulating it. Did you now? Patterson set down his thermos. Let me tell you something about that woman. She's made a lot of changes around here, some of them unpopular with the suits upstairs. But every single one has been about treating people with dignity. She didn't get you this promotion, Marcus. You earned it. But if you're too proud to see that you'll lose a lot more than a job. Marcus drove to Elena's brownstone and knocked until she answered. She looked exhausted, eyes red-rimmed, still wearing the same yoga pants from the night before. He opened his mouth to apologize, but she held up a hand. Don't. I can't do this right now. I spent all night wondering if you're right, if we're making a mistake trying to force two incompatible lives together. Maybe you're better off with someone who doesn't come with all my baggage. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate. I talked to Patterson. He told me the promotion was legitimate, that it's been in the works for months. I should have trusted you. I should have believed you wouldn't do something like that. Yes, you should have. Elena's voice was flat. But you didn't. Because some part of you still sees me as the person who was embarrassed that a janitor saved her life. Some part of you is waiting for me to prove I'm exactly as shallow as you expect. Marcus flinched because she was right. I've spent so long fighting for everything that I forgot how to accept grace. I see manipulation where there's only kindness because I'm used to the world taking more than it gives. But Elena, you're not the world. You're the woman I love, and I'm sorry for letting my insecurity hurt us. Elena was quiet for a long moment, arms wrapped around herself. I'm sorry, too. I should have understood how the promotion would look. I should have been more sensitive to how my position complicates things for you. I want to do this right. I want Sophie to see what a real partnership looks like, trust, respect, working through the hard stuff instead of running. Marcus took a step closer. Will you have dinner with us tomorrow? Official date with my daughter's approval. Elena's lips quirked, not quite a smile, but close. Does Sophie know what happened? She knows we fought. She asked if you were coming back. Marcus's throat tightened. I told her I was going to do everything I could to make sure you did. Then yes, I'd love to have dinner with both of you. The dinner happened on a Saturday, Elena arriving at 6 with flowers for Sophie and a bottle of wine for Marcus. Sophie grilled her with the intensity of a prosecutor building a case. What are your intentions with my dad? Do you like jellyfish? Can you fix things? Elena handled each question with honesty and humor, never condescending, treating Sophie's concerns with the same gravity she'd give a board meeting. The final question came as they were clearing dishes. Are you going to leave like my mom did? The kitchen went silent. Marcus started to intervene, but Elena shook her head and knelt so she was eye level with Sophie. I can't promise I'll never make mistakes. I probably will, but I can promise I'll never leave without a really good reason, and I can't imagine any reason good enough to leave you and your dad. Sophie studied her with serious eyes, then nodded. Okay, you can date my daddy, but I'm watching you. Marcus laughed, the tension breaking, and Elena stood with a smile that looked like relief. After Sophie went to bed, they sat on the fire escape that passed for a balcony, the city humming below them. Elena leaned against Marcus's shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her waist. She's protective of you. She's been hurt before. She doesn't remember her mother leaving, but she knows something's missing. Marcus pressed a kiss to Elena's temple. She's learned that people leave, and she's trying to make sure you understand what you'd be walking away from. I'll earn her trust, however long it takes. Elena tilted her head to look at him. I meant what I said. I'm not going anywhere. 10 months after the elevator, Elena collapsed during a board meeting. Marcus got the call from her assistant, a young woman named Jessica, who sounded terrified. Miss Thornton had been in the middle of a presentation when she'd gone pale, clutched her chest, and crumpled. The ambulance was taking her to Northwestern Memorial. Could Marcus come? He left work immediately, called Rachel to pick up Sophie from school, and drove to the hospital with his heart in his throat. The memory of finding Elena unconscious in the elevator played on loop, the fear that this time he wouldn't be there to bring her back. He found her in the cardiac unit, hooked up to monitors that beeped steadily, Dr. Patel speaking to her in low tones. Elena looked small in the hospital bed, vulnerable in a way that made Marcus's chest ache. Dr. Patel turned as Marcus entered. "You must be Marcus. Elena's been asking for you." The doctor was in her mid-40s, competent and direct. "This is her second cardiac episode in under a year. The tests show her heart can't sustain this level of chronic stress. She needs to make significant changes, or we're looking at serious consequences." Elena stared at the ceiling. "I've already cut back. I delegated more responsibilities. What else am I supposed to do?" "You need to step down as CEO, at least temporarily, maybe permanently." Dr. Patel's voice was firm. "Ms. Thornton, your body is telling you something. You need to listen before it's too late." Marcus watched Elena's face crumble the first time he'd seen her truly break. "This company is all I have. It's all I've built. Without it, who am I?" Dr. Patel left them alone, and Marcus moved to the bed, taking Elena's hand. "You're the woman I love. You're the person Sophie draws pictures for. You're someone who changed hundreds of lives with those reforms. The company doesn't define you. But it's my father's legacy. It's the promise I made to him when he died." Tears streaked down her face. "I built Thornton Industries to prove he was right, that you could be successful without being ruthless. If I step down, I'm admitting I failed. Your father wouldn't want you to die for it, and neither do I." Marcus's voice was rough. "I can't lose you, Elena. Not when I just found you." She stayed in the hospital for 3 days while they ran tests and adjusted medications. The board convened an emergency meeting, and the whispers started. Maybe it was time for new leadership, someone younger, someone who could handle the pressure. Elena refused to step down, insisted she'd just reduce her hours, delegate more. Marcus could see the terror in her eyes every time someone mentioned transitioning power. Sophie visited on the second day, bringing a drawing of 3 people holding hands under stars. She climbed onto the hospital bed and hugged Elena carefully, avoiding the IV lines. "You're not alone anymore. You don't have to do everything by yourself." Elena cried real sobs that shook her shoulders, and Sophie held her with the fierce protectiveness of someone who'd claimed her as family. Marcus stood back and watched something shifting in his chest. This woman had become essential to both of them, woven into the fabric of their lives, until he couldn't remember what it had been like before her. That night, after Sophie had gone home with Rachel, Marcus and Elena talked. Really talked without the walls they both used to keep each other at a safe distance. "I don't know how to not be CEO. It's been my identity for 15 years. "Then find a new identity. Be my partner. Be Sophie's." Marcus paused, searching for the right word. "Whatever you want to be to her, be someone who's alive in 10 years instead of dead from stress." "What if I step down and I'm nobody? What if I lose myself?" The vulnerability in her voice nearly broke him. "You found yourself in an elevator with a janitor who knew CPR. You found yourself in midnight conversations and board game nights and hospital vigils for a 7-year-old who isn't even yours." Marcus squeezed her hand. "You won't lose yourself. You'll just become more of who you really are." Elena decided to step down as CEO and transition to board chair and advisory role with limited hours and far less operational stress. The announcement sent shockwaves through the company. Some board members were relieved, others skeptical. The business press speculated about her health, her capability, whether Thornton Industries could survive without her at the helm. Elena held a press conference and faced the cameras with the same controlled power she'd always had, explaining that sustainable success required sustainable leadership, and she was modeling the work-life balance she'd been advocating for. Marcus watched from the back of the room, his chest tight with pride. She was choosing life over legacy, choosing them over the fortress she'd built. It couldn't have been easy giving up that much control, but she did it anyway. 14 months after the elevator, Sophie came home from school quiet and withdrawn. She picked at her dinner, avoided eye contact, and finally broke down when Marcus asked what was wrong. Ashley said her mom said that Elena is only with you because she feels guilty, because you saved her life, and now she's stuck pretending to like us. The anger that flashed through Marcus was white-hot, but he kept his voice calm. Do you believe that? Sophie shook her head, but doubt clouded her features. I don't know. Kids at school say mean things. They say we're poor, and Elena's rich, and it doesn't make sense. Marcus pulled his daughter into his lap even though she was getting too big for it. Here's what I know about Elena. She's one of the smartest people I've ever met. She built a company from nothing. She makes decisions every day that affect hundreds of people. Do you think someone that smart would spend all her time with people she doesn't actually like? No. Sophie's voice was small. But why does she like us? We're so different from her. The question beneath the question gutted him. His daughter had learned that the world measured worth in dollars and cents, and by that metric they came up short. We're different in some ways. We have less money. We live in a smaller place. But Elena doesn't care about those things as much as other people do. You know what she told me once? Being with us feels like coming home, like she can finally stop pretending to be something she's not. What if she gets tired of us? The fear in Sophie's voice made Marcus's heart crack. Then we'll be sad, but we'll be okay. You and me, we were fine before Elena. We had each other, and that was enough. He tilted Sophie's chin up so she'd meet his eyes. Elena is extra wonderful extra, but she doesn't complete us. We're already complete. Sophie was quiet processing. I don't want her to be extra, Daddy. I want her to be family. Then let's ask her tonight. Let's tell her what you're worried about and see what she says. Because the thing about family is you get to choose who's in it. Marcus texted Elena asking her to come over. She arrived within 30 minutes, worry creasing her forehead, still in her work clothes. He gestured to the couch where Sophie sat, hands folded in her lap with unusual solemnity. Sweetheart has something she wants to talk to you about. Elena sat beside Sophie and Marcus watched his daughter gather her courage. Are you with us because you feel guilty? Elena's eyes widened, genuine shock crossing her face. She looked at Marcus, and he nodded encouragement. Elena turned back to Sophie and took the girl's small hands in hers. No, not even a little bit. Can I tell you something? Sophie nodded. Before I met your dad, I was really lonely. I had lots of people around me, but I didn't have anyone who really knew me. I didn't have anyone who cared if I was happy or sad or scared. I was successful, but I wasn't alive. Not really. Elena's voice went soft. And then your dad saved my life, not just in the elevator, but every day after. He showed me what it looks like to care about someone more than you care about yourself. She paused, tears streaming down her face. You asked me questions about my job and listened to the answers. You showed me your drawings and told me about jellyfish and trusted me with things that mattered to you. Nobody's done that in years, Sophie. I'm not with you because I feel guilty. I'm with you because being with you makes me happier than I've ever been. I'm with you because when I think about my future, I can't imagine it without you both in it. Elena's voice broke. I'm with you because I love you. Sophie launched herself at Elena, wrapping thin arms around her neck. I love you too. I was just scared. Elena held her tight, looking at Marcus over Sophie's shoulder. He mouthed the words back to her. I love you too. Both of us. Later, after Sophie was asleep, they stood in the kitchen drinking tea that had gone cold. Elena set down her mug and took both his hands. I've been thinking about something. About what Sophie said about wanting me to be family. Marcus waited, his heart kicking up. I know we haven't been together that long by traditional standards. I know there's no rush. But Marcus, I need you to know this isn't casual for me. This is it. You're it. I want everything, the messy mornings and the homework battles and the family dinners. I want ordinary life with you, which is extraordinary because I've never wanted that before. Marcus pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. I want that too. I want you in my life permanently, officially, in whatever way makes sense. He pulled back to look at her. But Elena, I need you to be sure. Committing to being a family is different from dating. Sophie gets attached. If you leave, it won't just break my heart, it'll break hers too. Elena's eyes were fierce. I'm not leaving. I'm terrible at a lot of things, cooking, relaxing, accepting help, but I'm very good at commitment. When I decide something matters, I'm all in. You matter, Marcus. Sophie matters. This matters more than anything I've ever built. He kissed her, then deep and slow, a promise and a prayer. They were building something without blueprints, something that defied every rule about class and compatibility. But it was theirs, constructed from crisis and choice and the daily decision to keep showing up. 18 months after the elevator, Elena invited Marcus to see a house. 3 bedrooms in Roscoe Village, halfway between his apartment and her brownstone. Hardwood floors, a backyard big enough for Sophie to run in walking distance to good schools. Marcus stood in the empty living room and tried to ignore the price tag that would take him 20 years to afford. I want to buy it. Elena's voice echoed in the vacant space. Not as my house or your house, but as our house. Equal names on the deed, equal say in everything. Marcus turned to face her. Elena, I can't afford half of this. I don't care. We'll figure out what works for us. Maybe you contribute what you can and I cover the rest. Maybe we set it up so you pay the utilities and I handle the mortgage. The point isn't the money, Marcus. The point is building something together. She moved closer, taking his hands. I'm not trying to buy you or control you. I'm trying to say I want a future with you, with both of you. I want to wake up in the same house and argue about whose turn it is to make breakfast and watch Sophie grow up in a place that belongs to all of us. Marcus's throat was tight. This is a big step. I know. And if you're not ready, that's okay. But I am. I'm ready to stop pretending this is temporary or casual or something that might not last. Elena's voice was steady. I'm ready to be all in. Marcus looked around the empty house, imagining Sophie's drawings on the walls, imagining coming home to Elena instead of an empty apartment, imagining building a life that was bigger than survival, that was actually about living. Equal names on the deed. I contribute what I can, even if it's not half. Deal. And Sophie gets to pick her room first. Elena smiled, real and bright. Wouldn't have it any other way. They moved into the house 3 months later, a chaotic weekend of boxes and borrowed trucks, and Rachel showing up with pizza. Sophie ran through the empty rooms claiming the one with the best natural light for her marine biology posters and space models. Marcus stood in the kitchen and watched Elena unpack dishes, still unable to believe this was real. That he'd gone from a 1-bedroom apartment and a pull-out couch to a house with a yard and a woman who loved him enough to put his name on the deed. That night, after Sophie was asleep in her new room and the boxes were mostly unpacked, Marcus and Elena sat on the back porch looking at stars. The city glow made them faint, but Sophie had taught them the major constellations, and they could pick out Orion and Cassiopeia. I used to think success meant building an empire, Elena said quietly. Now I know it means this. Sitting on a porch with someone you love, with a child asleep upstairs who calls you family. Feeling like you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Marcus pulled her closer. I used to think providing was enough. Keeping Sophie fed, clothed, safe. But you taught me she needed more. She needed to see love partnership, what it looks like when someone chooses you every day. They sat in comfortable silence, the house settling around them, 3 lives knitting together into something new. Marcus thought about the man he'd been 18 months ago, cleaning floors and convincing himself that loneliness was strength. That man wouldn't recognize who he'd become, someone who'd learned to accept love without feeling diminished by it. Someone building a future instead of just surviving the present. Elena's hand found his in the darkness. Thank you. For what? For seeing me. For letting me see you. For taking a chance on something that probably looked impossible from the outside. Marcus smiled. Best risk I ever took. Same. Above them the stars wheeled on in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out below. But here on this porch in this house, 3 people had found each other against all odds, and that was enough. That was everything. 2 years after the elevator, Marcus stood in the bathroom at 5 in the morning staring at a velvet box small enough to hide in his palm. Inside was a ring he'd been saving for over 6 months. Nothing extravagant but carefully chosen. A simple platinum band with 3 small stones, sapphire, diamond, emerald, representing the 3 of them. He'd enlisted Sophie's help, picking it out, the 2 of them conspiring in hushed voices while Elena was at a board meeting. His daughter had insisted on the colored stones, said they were more interesting than all diamonds, and Marcus had agreed because Sophie understood Elena in ways that surprised him. Today marked the anniversary of the night he'd found Elena dying in that elevator, and he'd asked her to meet him at Riverside Tower after his shift ended. Mystery midnight meeting, he'd texted, and she'd responded with a question mark and a heart emoji. Marcus slipped the ring box into his jacket pocket and headed to work, his pulse hammering every time he remembered what he was about to do. The hours crawled. Marcus cleaned with mechanical efficiency, his mind elsewhere, rehearsing the words he wanted to say. Sophie had made him practice 3 times, coaching him on when to kneel and reminding him to speak from the heart instead of overthinking it. "Your heart is good, Daddy. Just let it talk." Wisdom from a 9-year-old who'd grown 3 inches in the past year and started asking questions about cellular biology that Marcus couldn't answer. At 2 in the morning, he texted Elena. She arrived 10 minutes later, stepping out of a cab in jeans and a sweater, hair loose around her shoulders. The sight of her still caught him off guard, sometimes the casual intimacy of seeing her in clothes that weren't armor. She smiled when she spotted him, and Marcus's throat went tight. Mystery midnight meetings, very romantic. He led her to the elevator, the same one where everything had started. His hand shook slightly as he pressed the button for the 40th floor, and Elena noticed her fingers lacing through his. "You okay?" "Yeah, just nervous." The elevator rose floors, ticking past, and Marcus hit the emergency stop button halfway up. Elena looked at him with curiosity and growing suspicion. "Marcus, what?" He took her hands, his palms damp. 2 years ago, I found you dying in this elevator. I had no idea that saving your life would end up saving mine." Elena's eyes went wide, understanding dawning. "I was so lost before you. I was surviving but not living. I was providing for Sophie but not showing her what love looks like. I was so scared of needing anyone that I'd convinced myself loneliness was strength." The words came faster now, tumbling over each other. "You taught me that letting people in doesn't make you weak. You showed Sophie what it means to be brilliant without losing humanity. You became part of our family so gradually I can't remember what life was like before you." Marcus dropped to one knee, pulling out the ring box. Elena's hand flew to her mouth, tears already streaming down her face. "I'm not rich. I can't offer you the lifestyle you're accustomed to. I work nights and worry about money more than I'd like. But I can offer you love that's real and steady and unwavering. I can offer you a daughter who adores you and a life that's messy and beautiful and wholly ours." He opened the box, the stones catching the elevator's fluorescent light. "Elena Thornton, will you marry me?" She was nodding before she found her voice pulling him to his feet. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." Marcus slid the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, and Elena kissed him hard enough to make him forget they were in an elevator stopped between floors. She laughed and cried at the same time, her forehead pressed to his. "I can't believe you did this here, in this elevator." Seemed appropriate. This is where everything changed. Elena pulled back, wiping her eyes, then reached for her phone. She pulled up a listing. Marcus recognized the house in Roscoe Village they'd bought together. "I need to tell you something, too. I've been planning to ask you something." Marcus's heart stuttered. "I already put both our names on the deed when we bought it. Equal ownership, equal everything." She looked up at him, vulnerable and hopeful. "I was going to propose that we make it official, not just dating, not just living together, but committed. A family in every sense of the word." Marcus laughed, the sound echoing in the stopped elevator. "So you were going to propose cohabitation commitment, and I proposed marriage. We've always done things backward." "Seems to be our specialty." Elena grinned through her tears. "So is that a yes to making everything official?" It's a yes to everything. The marriage, the family, the life, all of it. They stood there until the emergency phone started ringing, building security checking on the stopped elevator. Marcus released the emergency stop and they rode down to the lobby, hands clasped, both grinning like teenagers. The security guard gave them a knowing look but didn't comment, just waved them through to the street where Chicago's pre-dawn quiet wrapped around them. 6 months of wedding planning followed, compressed into weekends and evenings between work and Sophie's school schedule. They kept it small and intimate, 40 guests in the backyard of their house on a September afternoon when the weather cooperated with temperatures in the low 70s and a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Sophie took her dual role as flower girl and maid of honor, with deadly seriousness practicing her walk down the makeshift aisle until she had it perfect. She decorated the ring pillow herself, fabric, paint, and glitter creating a chaos of color that made Elena cry happy tears. The guest list was carefully curated. Marcus's side included Rachel and her family, Mr. Patterson, and 3 co-workers from the custodial staff, Sophie's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez. Elena's side was smaller, a handful of board members who'd supported her reforms, colleagues who'd become genuine friends, and Dr. Patel, who'd kept Elena alive long enough to have this day. Notably absent was Elena's mother, a woman who'd made her disapproval of Marcus clear in a phone call 6 months ago. Elena had listened to her mother's objections about class and appearances, then quietly uninvited her from the wedding. The night before, Marcus had found Elena standing in Sophie's doorway, watching their daughters sleep. Second thoughts. The opposite. Elena turned to him, eyes bright. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am. How different my life could have been if you hadn't known CPR. If you'd called security instead of helping. If either of us had been too scared to try." Marcus wrapped his arms around her from behind, chin resting on her shoulder. "No second-guessing the path that got us here. We're here. That's what matters." The wedding day dawned clear and perfect. Marcus woke early, too nervous to sleep, and found Sophie already awake in the kitchen eating cereal. She looked up at him with a smile that carried too much knowing for a 9-year-old. "You ready, Daddy?" "As I'll ever be." "Elena's really nervous too. I could hear her on the phone with Dr. Patel this morning." Sophie crunched her cereal thoughtfully. "But it's the good kind of nervous, like before a big test you studied really hard for." Marcus poured coffee, marveling at his daughter's emotional intelligence. "When did you get so wise?" "I pay attention." She grinned. "Also, I read a lot." By 3 in the afternoon, the backyard had been transformed. White chairs in neat rows and arch covered in roses and greenery at the end of the makeshift aisle, string lights waiting to glow when evening came. Marcus stood at the front in a suit Rachel had helped him pick out, watching guests filter in. Patterson caught his eye and gave him a thumbs up. Rachel dabbed at her eyes even though nothing had happened yet. Then the music started, a string quartet playing something classical that Elena had chosen. Sophie came down the aisle first, scattering rose petals with exaggerated care, the ring pillow balanced in her other hand. When she reached Marcus, she stage whispered loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear, "Don't mess this up, Daddy." Laughter rippled through the guests. Then Elena appeared at the end of the aisle, and everything else fell away. She'd chosen a simple ivory dress, elegant without being ostentatious, her dark hair swept up to show her neck. She walked alone, having declined her estranged mother's offer to give her away. This was her choice made freely, and she wanted that visible in every step. Marcus's eyes burned as she approached. Elena met his gaze and smiled, that private smile that was only for him, and he thought his heart might actually stop. Judge Maria Santos, an old friend of Elena's father, officiated with warmth and humor. She spoke about second chances and choosing family, about building something new from the ruins of what came before. Then it was time for vows. Marcus's hands trembled as he took Elena's, his voice barely steady. "I promise to see you always, to remind you to slow down when you forget, to be your partner in everything, to love you on hard days and easy ones, to build a life with you that's big enough for all our dreams." He paused, looking at Sophie, who stood beside them beaming. "I promise to honor what you've built with Sophie. To never try to replace what came before, but to add to it. To be worthy of the trust you're placing in me. Elena's turn. Her hands shook as she slipped a ring onto his finger, titanium instead of gold because Marcus worked with his hands and needed something durable. I promise to support your dreams as fiercely as you support mine. To choose you every day even when it's difficult. To be worthy of the second chance you gave me at life and love. She turned to Sophie, voice breaking, and I promise to love you as my daughter if you'll have me. To be there for school plays and science fairs and whatever adventures you drag us into. To be the best version of myself because you deserve nothing less. Sophie was crying, nodding hard. Judge Santos smiled and pronounced them married, and when Marcus kissed Elena, the backyard erupted in cheers. Sophie inserted herself between them, demanding a group hug, and they stood there wrapped around each other while guests laughed and applauded. The reception was simple catered food, a playlist instead of a live band decoration Sophie had helped hang. Marcus danced with his daughter, first spinning her around the makeshift dance floor while she giggled. "Are you happy, Daddy?" "Happier than I knew was possible." Then Elena and Sophie danced, and Marcus watched Elena lean down to listen as Sophie whispered something in her ear. Elena's face crumpled, and she hugged Sophie tight, and Marcus knew, without asking, that his daughter had called Elena Mom for the first time. The word she'd been dancing around for months, testing it out in private, but never quite brave enough to say in front of Elena. The first dance was to At Last by Etta James, a song Elena had chosen because she said it captured how finding Marcus had felt, like finally arriving somewhere she'd been searching for without knowing the destination. They swayed together while guests watched, and Marcus whispered against her hair. "Did you ever imagine this? When you were dying in that elevator, did you think it would lead here? No, but maybe that's how the best things happen. You do the right thing without expecting anything in return, and somehow it circles back and gives you everything you didn't know you needed." The reception wound down as evening turned to night, guests filtering out with hugs and congratulations. Rachel was the last to leave, pulling Marcus aside. "You did good, big brother. She's good for you. You're good for her." "I know. Sophie's thriving. You see that, right? She's more confident, asks for what she needs, isn't afraid to take up space." Rachel squeezed his arm. "That's because she sees two adults who love each other choosing to show up every day. You gave her that." After everyone left, Marcus and Elena and Sophie sat on the back porch in their wedding clothes, too wired to sleep. Sophie had changed the topic to bioluminescent organisms, explaining the chemical process behind light production in jellyfish with the kind of detail that suggested she'd been reading college-level texts. Elena listened with genuine interest, asking questions that made Sophie light up. Marcus watched them and felt something settle in his chest. This was his family, not by accident or obligation, but by choice. Three people who'd found each other across impossible distances and decided to build something that defied every rule about how families were supposed to form. 6 months after the wedding, Marcus stood in Sophie's bedroom doorway watching Elena help their daughter with a biology project on marine ecosystems. They were building a diorama of a coral reef, and Elena was surprisingly good at the intricate detail work, her fingers steady as she glued tiny plastic fish to painted cardboard. Sophie narrated the placement of each species, explaining symbiotic relationships and food chains with the confidence of someone who'd found her passion. Marcus had been promoted again, this time to facilities manager for the entire downtown district. 3 buildings, a team of 40 workers, actual decision-making authority. The salary was enough that they could start saving for Sophie's college fund, maybe take a real vacation next summer. Elena had settled into her role as board chair, attending quarterly meetings and advising on strategic decisions without the day-to-day stress that had nearly killed her. She'd started a mentorship program for young women in business, meeting with participants twice a month to share hard-won wisdom about balancing ambition with health. Sophie was thriving. 4th grade and already reading at a 7th grade level, her science fair project on ocean acidification, winning 1st place in the district competition. She'd made friends with kids from different backgrounds, sleepovers happening with increasing frequency. The duct-taped backpack was long gone, replaced by one with dolphins on it that Elena and Marcus had picked out together. On a Sunday morning in March, Marcus woke to the smell of pancakes and followed his nose to the kitchen. Elena stood at the stove in his old Northwestern t-shirt, hair messy from sleep, flipping pancakes with the focused concentration she brought to everything. Sophie sat at the table doing homework, a glass of orange juice beside her notebook. "Morning." Marcus kissed Elena's temple, then Sophie's head. "We're making chocolate chip pancakes because Sophie got an A on her marine biology test." Elena smiled at him, and Marcus saw contentment in every line of her face. "Also because it's Sunday, and we can." They ate together, the comfortable rhythm of family breakfast, arguing over whose turn it was to do dishes. The doorbell interrupted a package delivery. Sophie raced to answer it, coming back with a box addressed to her. Inside was a microscope, not a toy, but an actual research-grade instrument with a note for my favorite marine biologist. "Keep asking questions. Love, Mom." Sophie looked up at Elena, eyes shining. "Can we look at pond water, please? After dishes." Elena ruffled her hair. "And you need to write a thank you note." "I'll thank you right now." Sophie launched herself at Elena, who caught her with a laugh. Marcus watched them, his chest tight with the kind of happiness that felt almost painful in its intensity. This was what he'd been fighting for all those years of solo parenting, the knowledge that Sophie would grow up seeing love as something safe and sustaining instead of something that left. That afternoon they went to the shed aquarium, Sophie dragging them from exhibit to exhibit with boundless energy. She pressed her nose against the glass of the jellyfish display, explaining the species to Elena with encyclopedic knowledge. Marcus hung back, taking pictures on his phone, capturing moments he wanted to remember. Sophie and Elena backlit by blue tank light. Elena's hand in Sophie's as they walked between exhibits. The three of them reflected in the glass a family in every way that mattered. On the drive home, Sophie fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the day. Elena reached across the console to take Marcus's hand. "I've been thinking about something." Marcus waited, navigating traffic. "There's a scholarship program I want to start for kids whose parents work in facilities management or custodial services. Full ride to any college they can get into, no strings attached." She glanced at him. "I want to name it after your father, if that's okay." Marcus's dad had died when he was 19, a factory accident that had left the family scrambling. He would have loved that. "But Elena, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to. Your father worked his whole life in jobs people didn't respect, and he deserved better. This won't change the past, but maybe it'll change some kid's future." She squeezed his hand. "We can make sure Sophie's friends don't have to choose between education and eating. That's worth doing." Marcus's eyes burned. "Yeah, it is." They pulled into the driveway of their house, the porch light glowing welcome. Sophie woke when Marcus turned off the engine, groggy and disoriented. Elena carried her inside, Marcus following with their bags, and they got Sophie into pajamas through sleepy protests. After she was in bed, Marcus and Elena collapsed on the couch, the day catching up with them. "I used to think success meant building an empire," Elena murmured against his shoulder. "Now I know it means this. Coming home to people who care if you're happy, watching a kid fall in love with learning, feeling like you're part of something bigger than yourself." Marcus pulled her closer. "I used to think providing was enough. Food, shelter, basic necessities. But you showed me that Sophie needed more. She needed to see that she's worth fighting for, that love doesn't always leave." They sat in comfortable silence until Elena's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then smiled. "Dr. Patel's office. Reminder for my 6-month checkup." She looked at Marcus. "My heart's been good. No episodes, no scares. The stress reduction actually worked." "Good." Marcus kissed her forehead. "I plan on keeping you around for a while." "How long is a while?" "Forever sounds about right." The next week, Marcus returned to Riverside Tower for the first time since the wedding. He'd been promoted out of the building, but one of his workers had called in sick, and they were short-staffed for an important client inspection. Marcus didn't mind filling in. He'd never forgotten where he came from, and keeping those skills sharp felt important. He took the elevator to the 40th floor, muscle memory guiding him through hallways he'd cleaned for years. The executive offices were quiet at 2 in the morning, just how he remembered. Marcus pushed his cart toward the elevator lobby and stopped, staring at the spot where he'd found Elena 2.5 years ago. The elevator looked the same. Clean, functional, utterly ordinary. Nothing about it suggested that a life had ended and begun again in that small metal box. Marcus stepped inside, let the doors close, and stood in the silence, remembering. The weight of her sternum beneath his hands. The moment her eyes had opened. The complex emotion he'd seen flash across her face when she'd noticed his name tag. He hadn't known then that saving her would save him too. That the woman dying on the floor would become his wife, his partner, his daughter's mother in all the ways that mattered. Life was strange like that, full of moments that looked insignificant until years later when you could trace the thread backward and see how everything connected. Marcus's phone buzzed. Text from Elena. Can't sleep. Missing you. Come home safe. He smiled and typed back, almost done. Love you. The elevator doors opened and Marcus returned to work, but his mind was already home, with Elena curled on the couch waiting for him, with Sophie asleep upstairs dreaming of jellyfish and coral reefs, with the life they'd built together from crisis and choice and the stubborn insistence that love could bridge any distance. 2.5 years after the elevator, Marcus finished his shift and drove home as dawn broke over Chicago. He let himself in quietly, expecting Elena to be asleep. Instead, she was in the kitchen making coffee, still in her pajamas. She looked up when he entered and smiled, the expression soft with sleep and affection. Couldn't stay in bed without you. She poured him a cup, added cream the way he liked it. How was work? Fine. Quiet. Marcus accepted the coffee, pulling her against his side. I went back to the 40th floor, the elevator. Elena stiffened slightly. How did that feel? Strange. Like looking at a photograph of yourself from years ago and barely recognizing the person you were. He kissed the top of her head. I keep thinking about all the things that had to align for us to be here. If I'd been on a different floor that night. If I'd called security instead of helping. If you'd been too embarrassed to see me again. But none of that happened. We're here. Elena tilted her head to look at him. And I don't take a single day of it for granted. Footsteps on the stairs announced Sophie, appearing in the doorway with bedhead and her favorite stuffed jellyfish tucked under one arm. She was 9 years old, tall for her age, already showing signs of the person she'd become. Confident, curious, secure in the knowledge that she was wanted. You're home early, Daddy. Finished up faster than expected. Marcus held out an arm and Sophie tucked herself against his other side. The three of them stood in the kitchen as morning light filtered through the windows, bound together by choices made and promises kept. Sophie looked up at them with serious eyes. Mrs. Rodriguez asked us to write about our family for class. She said family means different things to different people. What did you write? Elena's voice was carefully neutral. I wrote that family is people who choose each other every day, who show up even when it's hard, who make you feel safe enough to be yourself. Sophie hugged her jellyfish closer. I wrote that my mom isn't the person who gave birth to me. She's the person who stays. Elena's breath hitched, and Marcus felt his own eyes burn. Sophie continued, oblivious to the emotional impact of her words. Is that okay? I know it's not the traditional answer. It's perfect. Elena's voice was thick. It's absolutely perfect. They stood there in the kitchen as the city woke around them, three people who'd found each other against all odds. Marcus thought about the man he'd been before the elevator, alone, convinced that asking for help was weakness, that love was a luxury he couldn't afford. That man wouldn't recognize who he'd become. Someone who'd learned that the strongest thing you could do was let people in. That real wealth had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the people who chose to stay. Above them, the house creaked and settled, containing their lives. Sophie's room with its marine biology posters and glow-in-the-dark stars. The master bedroom where Marcus and Elena fell asleep, tangled together every night. The office where Elena worked on scholarship applications and Marcus reviewed facility schedules. The kitchen where they argued about whose turn it was to cook and taught Sophie the importance of cleaning up your own messes. This was what he'd fought for. What they'd all fought for. Not perfection, but presence. Not a fairy tale, but something real and messy and infinitely better. 2.5 years ago, Marcus had breathed life into a stranger's lungs and walked away expecting nothing. Now he had everything: a family, a home, a future that stretched bright and unwritten before them. Sophie pulled away first, announcing she was hungry and could they please have waffles. Elena laughed and started pulling out ingredients while Sophie set the table and Marcus poured orange juice. The morning routine unfolded with practiced ease, each of them moving in the comfortable choreography of people who knew each other's patterns. And in the spaces between words, in the casual touches and shared smiles, was the evidence of something that couldn't be quantified or measured. Love, Marcus thought. Not the dramatic movie version, but the quiet, daily kind. The kind that showed up for breakfast and helped with homework and chose to stay when leaving would have been easier. That was the story worth telling. Not about a janitor and a CEO, not about class differences overcome or obstacles conquered, but about 3 ordinary people who'd found each other in an elevator and decided that what they had was worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth building a whole life around. Outside Chicago hummed with its usual chaos, millions of people navigating the complicated business of being human, most of them convinced they were alone in it. But here in this kitchen, in this house, 3 people had found each other. And that small miracle repeated in homes across the city was what made all the chaos bearable, what made it beautiful. Marcus looked at Elena, helping Sophie measure flour at his daughter, laughing at something Elena said, and felt gratitude so profound it ached. 2.5 years ago he'd saved a life without expecting anything in return. The universe had given him everything anyway, not because he deserved it, but because sometimes grace arrived in the form of a stopped elevator and a woman who'd forgotten how to breathe until a stranger reminded her how. And in the end, that was all anyone could ask for. To be seen, to be chosen, to matter to someone beyond measure. The rest was just details.